Welcome to the Swine Nutrition Blackbelt Podcast, the latest swine nutrition research digested for you. I'm your host, 𝗬𝗃𝗀𝗀, and today we have with us Macie Reeb, a master's student in swine nutrition at Kansas State University. So Macie, before we start, would you mind giving the audience a short introduction about where you're from and what experiences you have?
Yeah, of course. So thanks for having me on this morning, Clayton. And I am a Kansas native. I grew up in Lawrence, Kansas, and made the decision to go to Kansas State actually for my undergrad. And that's where I really fell in love with research. I found undergrad research and agriculture. And with that, found swine and the swine industry, and really took that and became passionate about it and determined that swine nutrition is kind of what I wanted to pursue and end up in a career in the swine industry. And so I decided to stick around at K-State and stay with the applied swine nutrition team and get my master's there.
Awesome. So one of the studies that you've done that I saw was published recently was a study about E. coli disinfection efficacy in the barns and kind of like identifying those problem areas. Would you mind telling me a little bit more about that study?
Definitely. So I had the fortunate opportunity as one of the very first projects to be a part of as part of my undergrad, and then following that up in my master's was this E. coli project. And so probably about a year and a half ago at one of our nursery facilities, it's our segregated early weaning facility here at K-State, we noticed a spike in the morbidity and mortality that was observed at that specific nursery site. And so we decided to necropsy a couple of those pigs and send that off to the VDL here at K-State to try to determine what was really going on with those pigs. And ultimately found out that there was an infection of E. coli K88. And so with this information then came about this study. And so with this study, we decided to take some environmental samples. Myself and some of the other members of my research team went out to survey some of the problem areas in the barn. And so we identified some of these areas. And so these included the exterior and interior surface of the cup waters, as well as the feeder surface and the feeder lip, some of the slats, the surface of the slats, as well as some of the rubber mats that were under those water cups. And so we decided to take samples from each of these 6 different locations, both before the current cleaning and sanitation procedure was carried out in the barn, and then again after that cleaning and sanitation procedures were carried out. And we really wanted to determine, was the cleaning and sanitation process that was in the barn really effective in reducing those populations of those bacterial pathogens in that barn to hopefully prevent another challenge for the next turn of pigs. And so we also decided to take samples on some of the common use areas. And so these were the water faucets in the office of the barn, as well as the water lines that ran throughout the barn, and then the exterior surface of some of the feed ad buckets. And we didn't find any presence of E. coli actually on those common use areas or surfaces. And so we decided to go ahead and not sample those again after the cleaning procedure was carried out. But then what we found for the initial samples and contamination, to no one's surprise, was a pretty high contamination. About the highest, I think, was about 9.5 to 10 CFUs per sample. And this was under the rubber mats and on the slats were the dirtiest surfaces pre-sanitation. And so with this information, we then did the current procedure, or the current at the time procedures in terms of cleaning. And so what that included was a power wash, and then a detergent, Barnstorm, was applied to all the surfaces as a detergent, and then Synergize was used as the disinfectant that was applied to all surfaces after the power washing step. And this was not specific to E. coli, but it does claim, the product claims that it protects or kills gram-positive and gram-negative species of bacteria. And so after this process, then we left about 2 days for the barn to dry after it was power washed. And then we went in again to collect the post-sanitation samples. And we collected from the same pens as before, the same sample locations as before. And after analyzing these and enumerating them back in the lab, we determined the presence of 𝗃 coli then again in all of the samples that were collected, unfortunately. And the highest presence of 𝗃 coli was found actually on the feeder surface and the feeder lip after the sanitation process. And so with that information, we determined that while there was a significant reduction in some of the other areas, like the slats or the inside and outside of the water cups, there was some problem areas that could have some more careful consideration the next go around when we're talking about cleaning the barn, and do deserve some more careful attention. And so with that, then kind of the action steps with the research that we did here was also finding those problem areas that deserve some more careful attention, as well as determining, maybe we needed to increase the water temperature. The water temperature that we currently used or used during this research was about 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And so maybe we wanted to increase the temperature of the power washer or increase the PSI or the pressure. It was about 3,000 PSI when used. And so potentially increasing that pressure of the power washer could also be another action item. But then I think it also speaks to the importance of biosecurity, because once these pathogens or once these bacterial contaminants get into the barns, it's much harder to reduce them or to kill them than it would be to prevent their spread or prevent them from ever entering the barn. And so I don't think it's stressed highly enough, the importance of biosecurity. And so that's kind of my take on this research. And
Yeah, great. So kind of like you said, it's a lot easier, or it's a lot harder, to eliminate a disease than it is to just hopefully keep it out to begin with. I mean, that's not easy either. But so you mentioned a couple ways about different ways to maybe enhance the cleaning or disinfection routine. But what do you think, based on this or any other research you've done, is the most viable? Because I wouldn't necessarily think, at least myself, I wouldn't think it's really an issue of the disinfectant not working, because it worked clearly on the slats when it was cleaned thoroughly. It's those corners that it gets stuck in, and with this big long wand, you can't always maneuver around the corners. So with that, do you think maybe it'd be possible for different feeder designs to be able to be more easily cleaned? Or do you think a hand scrubbing action would be the easiest method to kind of combat that?
Yeah. So I think a physical scrubbing or a hand scrubbing, like you had mentioned, might be another good step. I think the problem areas that we determined were under the rubber mats below the water cups, as well as the feeders. And so I think this just speaks to maybe they need some physical brushes to remove some of the organic matter that was found on those surfaces. And I think it's just, like you said, harder for the power washer to actually get into those places. And so I think understanding those problem areas would help producers determine what they need to spend a little bit more time on, maybe for physical scrubbing of those areas or otherwise. Gotcha.
Well, there's a lot we can dissect from this, and we'll never get it perfect. I wish we could always get it 100% clean, but if it comes down to doing something like a depop or something like that, where it's really important that you get every bit of it. Studies like this are really important. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing all that with us.
Yeah. I think it's also maybe another good idea, I think, if there's a disease outbreak or if there's a specific bacterial pathogen that a farm is experiencing, then maybe taking some environmental samples around the farm to determine the presence or doing something similar to this research. So determining the initial presence And then after their cleaning and sanitation procedures, then they'd be taking some additional swabs and samples to determine if their own cleaning and sanitation was effective. I think just would help to determine if they wanted to do anything else, or help them to determine their own problem areas would be another good thing.
Yep, exactly. Well, I appreciate you coming on and sharing all this with us, and good luck in your upcoming defense as well.
Thanks for having me on today, Clayton. I just wanted to take a second to say that the detailed report for this research, including some more on the enumeration process and lab techniques that were used for this research, can be found in this detailed report, which is included in the 2022 KSU Swine program, or Swine Day program, that's at ksuswine.org.
And everyone else, thank you for listening to the Swine Nutrition Black Belt Podcast. Please visit us at swinenutritionblackbelt.com, and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast channel so you won't miss out on the next episode. See you next week. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we are constantly on the lookout for the latest updates in swine nutrition. And if you have a swine nutrition related research trial that you would be able to share on our podcast, please send an email to nutritionblackbelt@swineit.com, and we would love to talk about your research. See you later.